If you're 55 or older and you've already picked a date in your head, a birthday, a year, maybe next spring, I need you to hear this before you tell your boss anything. The mistake that ruins retirements isn't spending too much. It isn't the wrong fund. It's the day you walk out the door. Retire 12 months too early or 12 months too late, and the math doesn't just shift a little. It can cost you 6 figures over the rest of your life. Nobody warns you about this one because it doesn't feel like a financial decision. It feels like a life decision. I almost made this mistake myself, not with a job, with something else, and it nearly cost me more than money. I'm Tom Wynn. I was you 8 years ago. And today I'm going to show you the exact window that separates a retirement that works from one that quietly falls apart. Here's the part nobody tells you at the retirement party. The date on the cake doesn't matter. What matters is what the market is doing the week you actually stop collecting a paycheck. If this is landing for you, if you've got a date circled and you're starting to wonder whether it's the right one, I'd ask you to subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing I break down every week, one real number at a time. I want to tell you about a woman named Nancy. She wrote to me 11 months ago, and I still think about her message more than almost any other I've gotten. Nancy retired from a school district in Ohio in early 2022, 31 years in. She'd done everything right, maxed her contributions, paid off her house, built what looked like a solid number. Her advisor told her she was ready. On paper, she was. She retired in March. The market dropped hard that spring. Then it kept dropping through the summer. By October, her portfolio was down more than 18%, not because she picked bad investments, but because of when she started pulling money out of them. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it is, without exaggeration, the most dangerous and least understood force in retirement planning. Here's the actual mechanic, because it matters. If you retire into a market downturn during your first 5 years of withdrawals, you can permanently damage how long your money lasts, even if your average return over 20 years ends up being identical to someone who retired at the market's peak. It's not about the average, it's about the order. Think about it like this. When you're still working, a bad market year barely touches you. You're not selling anything. You're buying month after month on autopilot, and a downturn just means your next contribution buys more shares for less money. Time is on your side, but the day you retire, that relationship flips completely. Now you're not buying, you're selling every single month to cover your bills. And if you're forced to sell during a downturn, you're locking in that loss permanently. Those shares are gone. They can't recover on your behalf because you already sold them to pay the mortgage. Two retirees can start with the exact same balance, the exact same funds, even the exact same 20-year average return. And simply because one of them retired into a rough first 5 years and the other didn't, one of them runs out of money a decade earlier than the other. Nancy wasn't withdrawing recklessly. She was taking a standard 4%. But 4% of a portfolio that just dropped 18% is a much bigger bite than 4% of a portfolio at its high point. She was selling shares low to fund her monthly income, which meant fewer shares left to recover when the market eventually bounced back. Two different retirees, same savings, same withdrawal rate, same funds. One retires in a strong market, one retires in a weak one. And 5 years later, their outcomes can differ by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because either of them did anything wrong. Because of one thing: timing. Nancy didn't know any of this when she retired. Neither did I at her age. I found out about it almost by accident, reading a study late one night when I couldn't sleep. 3 years into my own catch-up years, terrified I was about to make a version of the same mistake. Here's what should scare you a little in a useful way. This isn't rare. It isn't a fringe case. Anyone retiring on a fixed date without a plan for what happens if the market drops in year one is exposed to this same risk right now, today, whether they know the term sequence of returns or not. So the real question isn't, when do I want to retire? It's a completely different question. And it's the one Nancy wishes someone had asked her 11 months before she wrote to me, not 11 months after. So here's the real question, not when do I want to stop working? It's this. What does my income look like in the first 5 years after I stop, and where is it coming from, month by month? Most people never ask that. They ask the wrong question their whole lives. They ask it about the wedding, the house, the car. When can I afford this? And then when it comes to the biggest financial decision of their life, they ask a completely different, much softer question. Am I tired enough yet? Does this feel like the right time? Feelings aren't wrong. They're just not the whole picture. Because retirement timing isn't one decision. It's 3 decisions stacked on top of each other, and most people only ever make one of them on purpose. The first is the market decision, when Nancy walked into. The second is the Social Security decision, and this one is arguably even more permanent because you don't get a do-over. Here's the number that surprises almost everyone I talk to. If you claim Social Security at 62, the earliest age allowed, your monthly benefit is permanently reduced, not temporarily, permanently for the rest of your life, by up to 30% compared to what you'd get at your full retirement age. Not 30% one time. 30% every single month for as long as you live. Now flip it around. For every year you delay past your full retirement age, up to age 70, your benefit grows by roughly 8%. Guaranteed, not market-dependent, not a projection, 8% compounding for waiting. There is no investment on earth that offers a guaranteed 8% annual return with zero risk. And Social Security does exactly that if you're able to wait. So think about what that means for someone retiring at 62 because the date felt right, and claiming benefits the same month because that's just what you do when you retire. That person may be locking in a permanently smaller check for the next 20, 25, maybe 30 years of their life over something that was never actually a financial decision. It was a feeling. I want to be honest with you about something. I almost did this exact thing. Not at 62, I'm not there yet. But 3 years ago, I sat down and mapped out claiming early, purely because the number in my head said retirement, and my brain wanted to close the loop on all of it at once. Stop working, claim benefits, done. One clean decision. It felt satisfying, in the way that closing any big decision feels satisfying. It took a friend, someone with no financial background at all, just someone who asked me a good question, to stop me and say, wait, are those actually the same decision? They're not. When you stop working and when you start claiming Social Security do not have to happen in the same month or even the same year. You can retire and let that benefit keep growing in the background while you live off savings for a few years. Or you can keep some part-time income going and delay claiming even longer. There are combinations here that most people never even consider because nobody ever tells them the two decisions are separable. Nancy's mistake was about the market. This second mistake is about permanence, locking in a number that follows you for the rest of your life, based on a date that felt right instead of a date that was calculated. And here's the part that makes this worse than the market timing mistake. Markets recover. Social Security elections don't. Once you claim, that reduction is yours forever. But even this isn't the full picture yet. There's a third layer to this timing mistake, one that doesn't show up until a few years after you've already retired, when it's much harder to undo. And it's the one that catches even people who got the first two decisions right. The market decision gets the headlines. The Social Security decision gets whispered about at family dinners. But this third one, almost nobody talks about it. and it's the one that quietly cost me the most sleep when I finally understood it. It's the tax decision. And here's the part that makes it so dangerous. You don't feel it the year you retire. You feel it years later when it's already too late to undo. Let me ask you something, and I actually want you to sit with this one for a second, not just scroll past it. Have you ever picked a retirement date without once checking what your tax bracket looks like the year after you stop working? Be honest with me in the comments, not a guess, the actual year, because I didn't either until someone forced me to look. Here's what nobody explains clearly. The years right after you retire, before Social Security kicks in, before required withdrawals start, are often the lowest income years of your entire adult life. Your paycheck is gone. Your Social Security hasn't started yet. If you're living off savings, your taxable income can drop to almost nothing for a few years. That sounds like good news. And it is, but only if you know what to do with it, because that window closes. It closes because of something called required minimum distributions. Under current law, once you turn 73, the IRS forces you to start withdrawing a set percentage from your traditional 401k and IRA accounts every year, whether you need the money or not. And here's the trap. If you spent decades building up a large traditional account and you never touched it during those low-income years right after retiring, those forced withdrawals can shove you into a much higher tax bracket than you were ever in while working. You end up paying more in taxes in your 70s and 80s than you did during your career, on money you didn't even choose to withdraw. The fix has a name, a Roth conversion window. It means deliberately moving money from your traditional accounts into a Roth account during those low-income years, paying some tax on it now at a low rate, specifically so it isn't sitting there decades later forcing a much larger tax bill on you when you're older and have less flexibility to manage it. Most people never do this, not because it's complicated, it isn't once someone explains it, but because nobody tells them the window exists. It's not marketed, it's not on the forms. Your 401k provider doesn't send you a letter about it. You have to know to ask. And here's where all three decisions collide. The date you retire determines when this low-income window opens. The date you claim Social Security determines how long that window stays open. And what you do inside that window, convert, wait, or ignore it entirely, determines how much of your own money the IRS quietly takes over the next 20 years. Three separate decisions. Most people treat them as one. Nancy treated them as one. I nearly did too. And the honest truth is, I still don't have this fully figured out myself. I'm managing my own conversion window right now, year by year, and some years I get the math a little wrong. This isn't a solved problem, even for me. Anyone who tells you it is hasn't lived through it yet. So if you're sitting there with a date circled on a calendar, I want you to hold that date loosely for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to show you isn't about picking a better date. It's about understanding what actually determines whether that date works, and it starts with a mistake almost everyone makes in the exact same order. There's one more piece to this puzzle, and it's the one that blindsides people who retire before 65 specifically, because it doesn't show up in any retirement calculator I've ever seen. Medicare doesn't start until 65. If your circled date is 62, 63, 64, even 64 and a half, you have a gap to cover. And that gap isn't small. If you're retiring before Medicare eligibility and you don't have employer retiree coverage, you're looking at buying health insurance on the open market for two people if you're married, and depending on your state and your health, that can run well into the $20,000 to $30,000 range per year before you're even 65. Some people budget their entire retirement around their portfolio and their Social Security check and completely forget to build a line item for this. It's not a small oversight. It can be the single largest unplanned expense in the first 3 years of retirement. Now, I want to pause here and say something that might not be what you expect from me. This doesn't apply to everyone, and I'd be lying to you if I said it did. If you're retiring with employer-sponsored retiree health coverage, or your spouse is still working and you can go on their plan, this entire gap might not touch you at all. If you're retiring at 65 or later, this specific problem doesn't exist for you. I'm not here to make every risk sound like it applies to every person watching. It doesn't. Part of doing this honestly is telling you which parts of this actually matter for your situation and which parts don't. But if you are planning to retire early, before 65, without employer coverage, this gap sits right in the middle of the three decisions I already walked you through. It competes with your Roth conversion strategy because pulling more from a Roth account or timing conversions wrong can spike your income and increase what you pay for marketplace health insurance in a given year. It interacts with your Social Security timing because claiming early for extra cash flow to cover healthcare costs locks in that permanent reduction we talked about. Nothing here happens in isolation. Every one of these decisions pulls on every other one. And this is where I have to tell you something that's going to sound almost too simple after everything I just walked you through. The fatal mistake, the actual one, the one underneath all three of these, isn't the market. It isn't Social Security. It isn't taxes. It isn't even health care. It's the order you make these decisions in. Almost everyone picks their retirement date first, based on a feeling, a birthday, a number that sounds close enough, and then tries to fit the market, Social Security, taxes, and health care around that date after the fact, scrambling to patch each hole as it appears. Nancy did this. I nearly did this. It's the default because picking a date feels like progress, and running 4 interlocking calculations before you've decided anything feels like more homework than most people have the stomach for at the end of a long career. But there's a different order, one where the date isn't the first decision, it's the last one. And once you see how that works, you'll understand exactly why some retirements quietly fall apart in year 2 or 3, while others, built the same way with the same amount of money, just keep working. But before I show you the order that actually works, I want to show you what getting it wrong actually costs. Not a percentage, not an abstraction. A real number, because that's the only thing that makes any of this feel real instead of theoretical. I asked Nancy if I could run her numbers roughly using what she told me. Not exact. I'm not her advisor, and every situation has details I don't know, but close enough to be honest with you. The market timing mistake alone, retiring into that 18% drop and pulling 4% out anyway during the worst of it, put her on a path to run out of sustainable income roughly 7 to 9 years earlier than if she'd retired 18 months later into a recovered market with the exact same balance. Same savings, same withdrawal rate, 7 to 9 years just from timing. Then add the Social Security piece. Nancy claimed at 63 right when she retired because it felt like the natural thing to do once the paycheck stopped. That locked in a reduction of roughly 22% compared to waiting until her full retirement age. And if she'd been able to wait until 70 instead, her monthly check would be nearly double what she's receiving now. Compounded over a 25 or 30-year retirement, that single decision made in a single afternoon is worth more than most people's entire retirement savings account. We're talking a difference that can run past $200,000 in lifetime benefits, depending on how long she lives. Now stack the tax piece on top. Because Nancy claimed Social Security immediately, she never got a genuine low-income window to do Roth conversions in. Her income never dropped low enough. So her traditional accounts kept growing, untouched, right toward the age where required minimum distributions will force her to pull larger and larger amounts out at a higher tax rate than she would have paid if she'd converted gradually in her early 60s. Added up roughly, generously giving her the benefit of the doubt on every estimate, and the total cost of retiring on a date that felt right instead of a date that was calculated lands somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000 spread out over the rest of her life. Not because Nancy did anything reckless, not because she was bad with money. She wasn't. She was careful, disciplined, and diligent for 31 years. She just made one decision, the date, and let 3 other decisions follow it blindly instead of leading it. When I told her the rough range,
Yes,
she went
I
quiet
see.
on the phone for a long
Okay.
moment. Then she said
Thank you for
something I
calling.
haven't been able to shake. Nobody ever told me these were 4 separate decisions. I thought retiring was one decision with one date on it. That's the sentence that stayed with me. Not the dollar figure. That sentence. That's the fatal mistake. Not a bad investment, not overspending. Not even any single wrong choice in isolation. It's letting the calendar drive the math instead of letting the math drive the calendar. And here's the good news, because I don't want to leave you sitting in that number. This is completely avoidable. Every single piece of what cost Nancy that money was knowable in advance. Nothing about her situation was unusual or unlucky. The information existed. She just never saw it laid out in the right order at the right time before she'd already made the decision that mattered most. So let me show you what that order actually looks like. The sequence I wish someone had handed me on a single page 8 years ago before I made any of my own decisions. Here's what I mean by flipping the order. Instead of picking a date and scrambling to fit everything else around it, you build the date last out of 4 answers you already know. Start with the healthcare bridge. Before you touch a calendar, figure out whether you're retiring before 65 or after. If it's before, price out what coverage actually costs for your specific age and state, not a guess, an actual quote, and treat that number as a fixed bill you have to fund, the same way you'd treat a mortgage payment. That number alone can shift your realistic retirement date by a year or 2, and it's better to know that now than to discover it after you've already given notice. Second, map your tax window. Look at the years between when you plan to stop working and when you plan to claim Social Security. That gap, if you have one, is your best opportunity to convert traditional retirement money into Roth money at a lower rate before required minimum distributions force your hand later. This isn't something you do once and forget. It's a year-by-year decision, usually best made with an actual tax projection, not a rule of thumb. Third, and only third, not first, decide when to claim Social Security. Not based on when you stop working, based on your health, your family history, whether you're married and need to think about survivor benefits, and how much guaranteed income you actually need to cover your fixed costs. For a lot of people, especially anyone reasonably healthy with other savings to lean on, delaying even a few years past the earliest eligibility age meaningfully changes the math for the rest of their life. Fourth, and this is the piece that would have saved Nancy the most pain, build a buffer for the market before you ever submit a resignation letter. The standard advice here is to hold somewhere between 1 and 3 years of essential living expenses in cash or short-term bonds, something that isn't tied to the stock market, specifically so that if you retire directly into a downturn like Nancy did, you're not forced to sell shares at a loss to cover your bills. You draw from the buffer instead, and you let your invested portfolio recover on its own timeline, not on your bill-paying timeline. It's a simple idea. Almost nobody sets it up in advance because almost nobody knows the risk exists until they're already living inside it. Healthcare, taxes, Social Security, market buffer. 4 answers in that order. And only after you have all 4 does the actual date become obvious. Not a feeling, not a birthday, but the specific point where all 4 of those pieces line up and support each other instead of fighting each other. This is the sequence I eventually built for myself, piece by piece, mostly by making mistakes in the wrong order first and then correcting course. I didn't get it handed to me on one page. I had to assemble it the hard way, over years, the same years I was maxing out my catch-up contributions and hoping I was doing enough. I'm not fully retired yet. I'm still living inside this sequence right now, still adjusting pieces of it as my own numbers change. But for the first time since I opened that banking app back at 47 and saw $7,200 staring back at me, I actually know what I'm waiting for and why. And Nancy, I want to tell you what happened after that phone call because it's not the ending you might expect. Nancy didn't get to undo the market drop. Nobody can undo that. And she'd already claimed Social Security, so that decision was locked in too, permanently the way I told you it would be. When I first ran the rough numbers with her, I could hear it in her voice, that specific kind of quiet that isn't quite anger and isn't quite grief. Just the sound of someone doing math they wish they'd done 3 years earlier. But she wasn't done making decisions. That's the part she didn't realize at first, and it's the part that took me longer than I'd like to admit to say out loud to her, because it's easy to comfort someone with a nice sentence and much harder to hand them something they can actually use. She built the buffer late, 3 years late, but she built it. She moved 1.5 years of essential expenses into something that wasn't tied to the market, so the next downturn, whenever it comes, doesn't force her to sell at the bottom again. It meant selling some things she'd been holding on to out of habit more than strategy, and it meant an uncomfortable conversation with herself about the difference between money she needed and money she'd just grown attached to watching grow. She told me that part felt almost harder than the math. She sat down with someone who actually ran her tax projections and found a smaller version of that conversion window still available to her, a few $1,000s a year, not the full opportunity she'd missed, but not nothing either. It won't undo what the first 3 years cost her. She knows that. She said it plainly, without much drama, the way you talk about a number that's already final. But it changes what the next 20 years look like compared to doing nothing at all. And she went back and checked something she'd never thought to check before: spousal and survivor benefit rules, in case her claiming age affects what her husband could receive down the road. She hadn't known that piece existed either. Almost nobody does until they go looking, usually because something already went wrong once and they don't want it to happen twice. That's the whole thing. That's what separates the retirements that quietly work from the ones that quietly fall apart. It was never about being perfect on day one. Nancy wasn't. I wasn't. It's about knowing there are 4 decisions instead of 1, and making as many of them on purpose as you still can, starting from wherever you actually are, not from where you wish you'd started. I think about this every time someone tells me they're just waiting to feel ready. I understand that feeling. I lived in it for years, but readiness was never going to show up as a feeling. It shows up as 4 answers on a page: what healthcare costs before Medicare, how many years of low-income tax window you actually have, what claiming age makes sense given your health and your spouse's, and how many years of expenses you've set aside outside the market. Once those 4 things are answered, the date isn't a leap of faith anymore. It's just arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't keep you up at night the way a feeling does. If you've got a date circled right now, I'm not telling you to erase it. I'm telling you to check it against these 4 things before you make it permanent: healthcare, taxes, Social Security, market buffer. In that order. The date comes last, not first. I share this kind of breakdown every week. The real numbers, the real mistakes, mine included. So if any part of this changed how you're thinking about your own date, that's exactly what subscribing here means. It's not a favor to me. It's just how you'll see the next one of these before you need it, instead of after. And there's a video I made about that Roth conversion window, specifically how to actually calculate it for your own numbers, Not just understand that it exists, because that's the piece almost everyone messages me about after watching this one. If today's video was the fear, that one's the plan. Go watch that next. I was you, 8 years ago, staring at a number that felt too small and a timeline that felt too short, thinking the whole thing came down to one decision made on one good day. It doesn't. It never did. I still don't have every piece of this figured out, but I know the order now. And knowing the order is the whole difference between a retirement that quietly works and one that quietly falls apart while everyone around you assumes it's fine, because from the outside they always look exactly the same.